Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Westbrook Council of Beaches Candidates Forum. My name is Pat Marcarelli. I am the president of the Westbrook. I did West Beach for so long. The Westbrook Council of Beaches. I thank you all for being here tonight and attending our forum. Before turning the program over to our moderator, I'd just like to thank Westbrook's first selectman, Noel Bishop, who is in the room here, and the staff here at Town Hall for assisting us with the venue here and setting up and helping this thing come to fruition tonight. I really do appreciate it. We all appreciate it. Thank you. I also want to thank you really quick to our friends here at the Valley Shore Community TV. They have been fantastic setting up their equipment here tonight. Obviously, you can hear me, so we know the microphones already work. And they've been working hard in the last month or so because, as you may all know, the town has a new internet system, and we're worried about the Wi-Fi and all the connectivity and so forth, but they've been running the hardwire, everything here. So tremendous hats-off job to them. They do a top-notch job. Our council members on the Westbrook Council of Beaches, our council members thank everybody. You know who you are for your help that helped me get this thing together. I'm the first-year president of the Council of Beaches, so I needed a lot of help here, but a tremendous team here. So thank you very much. My hat's off to you. Our candidates. We thank everyone for showing up tonight, showing your interest. This is so important to all of our communities, not just here in town, but all of our communities. They serve a bunch of us from all over the place, and thank you so much for taking the interest and the time to attend this event tonight. This is one of the most successful events that we have here in town, as you can see by the turnout here. I apologize to the people in the back that are standing. We were trying to find some more chairs, but we have, and look around, yes, we might have some more seats as well. I want to thank everybody that brought food tonight. We have boxes out there. If you have them in your car still, we have boxes out there. This goes out to the Shoreline Food Pantry at St. Mark's. So I thank everybody for that. We have an ongoing thing that'll probably be touched upon later this evening. Also, just a quick announcement, the Council of Beaches would like to announce, in conjunction with the Westbrook Outlets, the Westbrook Police Department, we're going to be holding a Stuff a Cruiser with new clothes. It's an event to benefit the Alice population in the area, and it will be held at the outlets on Saturday, December 8th. Put that on the calendar if you can. This is a great community service. So please check our website, and we'll have details more up to date as we get closer to that date. Also on the 15th of December, the Youth and Family Services will be holding a Stuff a Cruiser with new toys on our town green. More will come as well once that comes in thing. And also, if you have any questions, please check our website, westbrookcouncilofbeaches.org. We try to keep everything up to date. We have it up and running. We'll be changing stuff as time goes on. So please check that if you ever need any local news or anything like that. We have the links to everything from local government to the state government. Anything you might have an interest in, we have that all the way to Hartford and so forth. So do that. And I want to thank you all for, again, once coming. And also tonight, our timekeeper is Tony Fastea, is sitting over in the corner over here. And Darlene Briggs is going to be roaming around later on with our microphone if we have time to do our audience questions tonight. At this time, I'd like to turn the event over tonight, our program over tonight, to Andy Schatz. Andy, come on up, and you take over from there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you to Pat and the Westbrook Council of Beaches. Also, Chris Morgan, who is running one of the cameras back there, but who heads the Valley Shore Community Television, said when he heard that we were trying to decide, as the Council of Beaches was trying to decide whether to do this forum again, he said it really is a very successful program, and it's one that we can run right up to the day of the election because it's nonpartisan, it's got all the candidates. So it's going to be running from now until November 7th, 6th. Please tell your friends to tune in and watch it, and hopefully we'll get a lot of information tonight. In addition to Noel Bishop, who's here, who's the first selectman in Westbrook, I wanted to recognize John Hall, who's a selectman in Westbrook, who's here, and also, I understand, Ed Segrist, or Bob Segrist, rather, who is the state rep from the 36th District in Essex, Deep River, and Chester is here as well. If there are any other elected officials who are here and I missed you, I apologize. I'm going to digress just a minute. Pat mentioned the work that the Council of Beaches is doing for the Alice population, and I just wanted to explain for anyone who's not familiar with that. We have Alice in the back. She's now sitting on the table back there, and Alice stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, and Employed. Folks who are working hard but barely getting by, for whom any setback would be devastating and leave them hungry, homeless, or without the child care necessary to work. Beginning about 5 years ago, the United Way commissioned an extensive study by economists of communities throughout Connecticut and many other states. These have been updated every 2 years, and the most recent study was released just a few weeks ago. The study looks at all of the costs necessary to sustain those who are working who would like to work. Unfortunately, the level of the Alice population in Middlesex County and around Connecticut is much too high. Although the most recent study showed that in Westbrook it is improving, it still includes 33% of our residents. And if you think about it, you'll probably realize it includes a lot of our neighbors, friends, and employees. The Shoreline Basic Needs Task Force and the Council of Beaches have been striving to improve the situation for Alice, not only combating hunger and lack of affordable housing, but also economic action to find more and better jobs. Toward that end, we invite all of you also to attend our next Economic Roundtable meeting here on Thursday, November 29th from 6 to 7:30. There will be at least one question during the forum about issues relating to Alice. So let me briefly introduce the candidates. We've organized them by office. We've organized them by alphabetical order. So here, you're not going to find the Republicans or Democrats necessarily on the left or the right. Wouldn't it be great if, no, never mind. So let me briefly introduce the candidates, and they're welcome to put in whatever biographical information they want in their opening statements or throughout the night. From your left to right, the candidates for the 23rd House District, which includes Old Saybrook and the southern part of Westbrook, are Devin Carney, who is the Republican and incumbent, and Matt Puglisi, who is the Democrat and a challenger. In the 33rd Senate District, in the middle, we have on the left Norm Needleman, the Democrat and currently the first selectman of Essex, and Melissa Gibran, who is a Republican and currently the state representative for the 34th House District, which includes East Haddam, East Hampton, and parts of Colchester. And last, we have three candidates for the 35th House District, which includes the rest of Westbrook, and as well as Clinton and Killingworth. On the left, we have Jason Adler, who is the Democrat. In the center, we have Madeline Levely, who is with which party? The Green Party, I apologize. And at the right, we have Jesse McLaughlin, who is a Republican and is the incumbent representative in that district. I'll describe the rules for the forum in a moment, but let me stress one. Please do not clap during the forum. We know that each candidate has supporters here. We know there are things they will say that you will like or you may not like. By clapping constantly, once one series of folks claps, the rest clap, it takes up a lot of time. We don't get to find out as much information. So please no clapping. There will be 2 exceptions, and one of them is right now to give a hand to all of these candidates for coming. The rules were sent to the candidates about a week ago, and I want to just describe them briefly. Each candidate will have 1 minute for an opening statement. The questions that will be asked, each candidate will have 1 minute to respond. In my discretion, I may allow folks to reply because, particularly if something comes up that criticizes an earlier response, so that it won't be left without being addressed. I would encourage the candidates not to criticize each other. The audience is smart enough to pick up on the differences in policies and outlook. There were 4 questions that we sent to the candidates a week in advance, and we do this in order to give them some time to familiarize themselves with issues with respect to particularly issues that are important to the Council of Beaches, so that they'll have time to formulate their response. I'll open with a couple of those questions, and then we'll open it to the audience for questions, and I'll intersperse more questions from the Council of Beaches from time to time. So we're going to start with opening statements, and the candidates have drawn to see who will speak first. It will be the same order for opening and closing statements. We're going to start with the 23rd Assembly District. First to speak will be Devin Carney, and then Matt Puglisi.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you to the Council of Beaches, to the town of Westbrook, to everyone who came, including the candidates, and especially to our veterans who are here tonight, because without your service, we couldn't have the democracy or forums like this. So thank you to all the veterans who are here in the audience. For the past 4 years, I've devoted my life to representing the people of the 23rd District. It hasn't always been easy due to budget constraints, but I've always put the people I represent first above party politics and special interests. I have consistently worked along a bipartisan basis for structural budget reform, on environmental issues, on issues for seniors and education. I've also stood up for small towns and small businesses and taxpayers against policies that would raise the cost of living and negatively affect our quality of life. Our state has a lot of opportunities, but we must elect leaders who focus on reducing our debt, bringing businesses and jobs back, and making Connecticut the destination we all know it can be. Tonight, I hope it will be clear to you that my experience and record make me the most qualified candidate to turn Connecticut's economy around. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Puglisi, and it's a pleasure to be here tonight and have the opportunity to speak to everybody. Thank you for the Westbrook Council of Beaches for organizing this. I am honored to be the Democratic candidate for the 23rd District. I am running for office for the first time because I love Connecticut. I have loved growing up in Connecticut. My wife and I live in Old Saybrook, where she grew up, and we're raising our 2 daughters there at Goodwin School. And like a lot of you, I'm concerned about their ability to grow up in Connecticut. We're in a really bad place right now in this state. We have a revenue problem and we have a spending problem, and we need to get both of them under control. And what we've been doing for the last many years is not working. And we need new leaders, and we need new ideas that are going to go up to Hartford and that they're going to fight for progress, not the partisan politics that are bogging things down. So I've spent my career in the nonprofit industry. I've worked with arts organizations, theaters, where fiduciary responsibility, transparency, accountability, that's the way that we run and deliver service. And that's the style of leadership that I want to bring to Hartford.
So good evening, everyone. My name is Melissa Zebrin, and I am currently the state representative for East Haddam, East Hampton, and part of Colchester. And I want to also take a moment to thank the organizers and certainly everyone here. It is really an honor to be the candidate in the 33rd District because we have such a beautiful district, and I'm so proud to be running to represent it. In my work in the legislature, I've been solely focused on the Connecticut state budget, and over the last 2 years, because of Republicans' input, we will do some amazing things. For instance, for the first time since the income tax was passed in 1991, we finally fulfilled a promise to taxpayers and passed a spending cap. But my real passion is on the Environment Committee, and I am formerly the president of Friends of Gillette Castle State Park. I'm also a proxy for the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, and I personally spend a lot of time in Long Island Sound battling my husband for the largest striper in Long Island. And I look forward to hearing the rest of the comments tonight. Thank you. I went wrong side.
Good evening. I'm Norman Needleman, and I'm happy to be here tonight. Almost 40 years ago, I started a manufacturing business. That business is now run by my two sons, headquarters in this district. We employ over 150 people. Serving my fourth term as First Selectman of Essex, where I work side by side with Democrats, Republicans, and independents. We find consensus and solve problems. That approach works. You have to excuse my vocal cords. We've kept property taxes in Essex amongst the lowest in the state while improving services. Over the last few years, we've seen diminished state support, yet this year we managed to reduce our mill rate. Our reason for success is that we've made Essex business friendly. We have over 700 businesses. We did it by reducing red tape and making town government more responsive to businesses and individuals. I'm running for state senate because we all know that Hartford is the problem. There is no reason that one of the most beautiful states in the country, we can't get it right. If elected, I will work with everyone and anyone willing to get our state back on track.
Okay, so now for the 35th Assembly District, we'll start with Ms. Levely and then on to Mr. McLaughlin and Mr. Adler.
Good evening, everyone. I am so happy to be sitting here with my two opponents. I think it is a strong sign of Connecticut's help that we have such fine people running for office. I'm running for office because I want to deal with real issues. I do not want to get caught or descend into red-blue power struggles. As a psychologist who has practiced in Connecticut for more than 40 years, I have seen an erosion of basic fairness and social rights and opportunities for our citizens. I am running for office to ensure sustainability, economic, environmental, and social, and I will not step down. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Westbrook Council of Beaches. I'm Jesse McLaughlin. I have the tremendous honor of serving the towns and the community that I grew up in. Our state is experiencing very difficult financial times, stemming from decades of poorly managed finances, long-term liabilities. And for the past 4 years, I have faced those problems head-on by working with Republicans and Democrats alike to put forward budgets that rein in debt, that make our state a more attractive place for small businesses to grow and create a better tax climate for our hardworking families. When our communities were threatened with cuts from the governor's office, we worked together to pass budgets that restored funding to 9-town transit, that restored funding to Shoreline East, that fully funded the Medicare Savings Program, and worked to bring back and preserve critical educational cost-sharing grants that our towns really do rely on. It would be a tremendous honor to continue to serve the place that I grew up, and I'd like to ask for your consideration in November. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jason Adler. I'd like to start with thanking the Council of Beaches for this wonderful opportunity to speak to the residents of Westbrook, Clinton, and Killingworth. I'd also like to thank the many members of the audience who I see as friendly faces, from Jim Crawford and the rest of the volunteers who walk with me on many a humid night this awful summer, as well as Bethany, my campaign coordinator, my 2 children with their grandparents at home in Clinton, and my lovely wife Meredith recording me now for some reason. I'm running for office for my family and for my friends and for my loved ones. I'm running for your families as well. Over the past few months, I have walked on all of your streets, knocked on thousands of doors, and one thing is clear. For the most part, people want to stay in Connecticut. They love this place. They want to stay here. They want their grandchildren and children to be able to grow up here. But that's not as affordable as it once was, and many people feel the need or the requirement to leave in order to afford their daily bread, their medication, their housing. We have to bring real change to Hartford, and I'd like to be the one to do that. Thank you.
Okay, let's start with a question about the sound and water bodies that are so near and dear to us. Rising sea levels and storms with more intense rainfall have potential impacts on rivers and their tributaries in our communities and along Long Island Sound. What are your views on improving coastal resiliency and the role of government versus private party responsibilities? I'm going to start over here with the 23rd Assembly District, and we're going to go right down from left to right all the way down the aisle, okay?
So thank you very much for the question, Andy. So this past legislative session, we did pass pretty comprehensive legislation regarding sea level rise and how municipalities can deal with it through Senate Bill 7, actually, and it required the Connecticut Institute of Resilience and Climate Adaptation to try to come up with the best information possible for municipalities, zoning boards, planning commissions, things like that, to try to come up with the best policy moving forward to take this very real threat into consideration. So in my opinion, that was a good step to better understand what the real actual impacts are on our communities and our coastline, because it is something we're going to have to plan for. As for government versus private party, I think both have responsibilities. Government certainly has to provide the best, most up-to-date information possible. I hear from a lot of folks about the federal government and the flood zones and things like that, and how their homes aren't really in a flood zone, but they have to pay that extra insurance. So I think it's important that people have the opportunity to appeal if they question anything in those maps, but certainly people have a responsibility to build responsibly.
Thank you. Coastal resiliency is a huge issue for our district because the shoreline is our identity. When we protect Connecticut's coastlines, we are protecting and working towards Connecticut's economy. It's such a key issue. And climate change is not something new. This is something that we've seen coming for decades, and we need to be responsive and be putting a plan into place. In terms of who should be taking the lead here, I think that it really is across multiple lines. We need to have the municipalities, we need to have the state government, the federal government, and private industry working together with the scientists, with the data that can move things forward, because we need to be looking at natural solutions for mitigation as well as engineered solutions. But everybody has a role to play in this. And if I'm elected, I will make sure that we move on this aggressively and quickly, because this is our local economy, privately and publicly.
So we all know that coastal resiliency is critical both on the Sound and in the rivers. Some of our most beautiful properties are all along the Long Island Sound and up the rivers. And I'm happy that the legislature did something. I wish that they would have gone a little further and mandated a little bit higher level of renewable energy, because I think that in the end, we have a federal government that doesn't recognize that there is a problem, and we do have a major problem with climate change, and we are on the front lines. All of us, especially in town government, have fought the fight of dealing with horrible storms that have been coming at our way more frequently. And I think that the only solution is to move away from away from a carbon-based energy system. So I don't think that they went far enough. I think that there's more to do, and I think that it'll go a long way to protect the state.
So We've done a few things regarding this issue in the last session. The first thing we talked about was a blue plan. You might have attended some public hearings for that. It was very widely debated in the Environment Committee, and that put forward an advisory committee. And if you didn't know, you actually have a delegate in Westbrook who sits on that advisory committee, Sid Holbrook. And so you can also, on the DEEP's website, sign up to get email alerts about the blue plan. SB 7 was a little bit controversial for a couple of reasons. One, it removed the data collection from NOAA and put it into Yukon. So in committee, I voted against the initial legislation. It was redrafted. I didn't think it was perfect, but I did vote yes for it on the chamber floor because the process in Hartford is it goes through a committee process first. It then is adapted, updated, and changed before it heads to the chamber for a final vote. In addition, it also required mandated postings of the sea level rise, which is very helpful for our municipalities.
So Connecticut's shoreline is an integral part of our economy, and thus there is a reason for both private and public interests to play a role in protecting it. One small example of this is in my beloved town of Clinton, where Lobster Landing and the Shellfish Commission work together, and now they are reaping the crops, if that's the word, of new oysters that are being served for the first time in years. We need to use such small examples as larger models for public and private investment in things like solar energy, and a way to protect our environment, because let's remember, it's not just the shoreline that's impacted. It's the coastal communities within the landscape as well, but also our ecology, our health, the environment as a whole. We are tied together, and we must, as a state, not just think of the short-term economic gains, but also the long-term feasibility of going towards more renewable energy to protect our environment and hopefully to have an economic boon in addition.
As we all know, water does not discriminate against political boundaries. We must, as towns and as states, provide a coordinated effort to actively address the major climate changes that face our coastline. Flooding is going to affect not only the coastline immediately, it will affect inland waterways as well. Some towns are beginning to address this by providing active infrastructure, creating berms and specialized marshlands to absorb water. We need to increase this on a statewide effort, because if we protect one piece of the shoreline, water will go somewhere else. And we are good citizens. We are not going to flood out our neighbors. We must work together as towns, councils of governments, and as the state legislature.
Thank you. We all know here that our natural resources are a major economic driver to the local economy and the shoreline. Senate Bill 7, a piece of legislation that Representative Carney mentioned, was a step forward. The private sector and local governments each have a role to play. I think we're going to see insurance companies participating in the shaping of how we respond to rising sea levels. State government has a role, but I don't think any of us here want more unfunded mandates shoved down our throat by the state. I think we need support. I care very much about taking care of our environment. I've spent the early parts of my career building solar energy because I believe we need to reduce our carbon footprint and leave our next generation a planet that's better than the way we found it. And I'd be very excited to keep working with both sides of the aisle to develop solutions, both local and at a state level, to tackle this problem. Thank you.
Thank you all. I did not detect any need for any further comment or rebuttal, but if any of you think that there's anything that was said that you need to respond to, yes, Ms. Shapron.
So thank you. I just wanted to point out, Representative just spoke about unfunded mandates. You should also know, last session we had a number of unfunded mandates mandating certain course instruction, one of which was a specific course for climate change, which would have been an unfunded mandate on our entire state and our school boards of education, and I did vote against that, including some others as well. Thank you.
Mr. Newman.
Yeah, so I wasn't going to bring that up, but if there was anything I think we should be educating our kids about, it's about the impact of climate change going forward. Too many people are in la-la land denying that this is happening, when every year we have another worst ever of this or worst ever of that. And I will tell you, as a aging baby boomer, I know I don't look it, but as an aging baby boomer, I will tell you that we have not done a good enough job of managing this planet for the future. And I am hopeful that those that are younger and those that are educated in our schools will be taught to not deny science, accept that this is happening, and come up with solutions to fix this. I was very disappointed in that vote.
Mr. Bond, I'll let you speak, but let me just ask you a question. There are two potential concepts here. One is the mandating it, one is whether it should be taught, and the other question is denying science. And I was curious as to, is there evidence that there are communities where they're actually denying science as opposed to not teaching about climate change? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for that question. No, there's not. CABE and others talked about what they were already doing in our school systems around the state for climate change. That bill has a fancy headline, but when you start reading it, it dictated one specific course model, requiring schools across our state to purchase that material to teach something they're already teaching. That is the definition of an unfunded mandate. When we say to local communities, no, I know you're already teaching it, but you're not teaching it exactly the way we want you to, so here you have to buy this course, so now you can. We had a number of those unfunded mandates, and as a first selectman of a small town, I'm surprised to hear somebody say that they actually welcome more of those kinds of unfunded mandates.
Go ahead, Mr. Needleman.
We could go on. So I am not a big fan of mandates, unfunded or funded, to be quite honest with you, but this rises to the level of critical. We do not debate how we should teach reading or which way we should teach history. There are required courses, in my opinion, because the life and the future of our planet depends on this. We should all be speaking with a common voice here. This is a critical thing. This planet could be so fundamentally different in the next 100 years that debating seawalls and all the stuff that we're talking about becomes irrelevant. You could have no habitable space and no insurable space on this side of Route 1. It's on the other side of Route 1. It's quite conceivable that based on some of the modeling, we need to do everything we can. We need to educate our kids. We need an all-hands-on-deck approach. And it's sad to me that we're not all on the same page on this. Want to go again?
Let me go on to a second question that the council had sent out, which will carry on from this issue about climate and impact and carbon, and that is with respect to transportation, taxes on gasoline, and so on. Connecticut legislatures and administrations have continually drained funds from the Special Transportation Fund, which receives fuel taxes, registration, and license fees supposedly dedicated to support transportation spending, and instead diverted them to general fund spending. The legislature is expected to again consider adding tolls to our interstate highways. I'd like you to comment generally, if you will, about the transportation situation in the state, and specifically about whether there should be tolls and whether any toll system should treat local residents who commute short distances on highways, particularly along Route 95 here, differently than long-haul travelers. For this one, we're going to just reverse it, come back starting with Mr. McLaughlin at the end. We'll come right down the list, and then we'll get to something a little more difficult. Next time.
Sure, thank you. This session, the Department of Transportation proposed a plan to install 72 tolling locations across the state, which would cost some of our residents hundreds of dollars a week to commute. I think we can all agree that our infrastructure is in need of good repair, but that I do not believe is a proper way forward. This year, we were able to pass legislation that would put a lockbox on the transportation fund, and you all get to go to the polls. It will be a ballot box initiative to make sure that funds in the special transportation fund are no longer rated to pay for other items in the general fund. That has got to stop. We have been robbing Peter to pay Paul, and we need to put an end to it. Now, moving forward, I'm open to the conversation. I think we should look at ways to make, if we're going to investigate tolling locations, we should look at ways to make it affordable for Connecticut residents. Let's bring down the gas tax. Let's look at rebates for Connecticut residents. Let's get creative with it. We can't say we don't want it one way. We can be creative. Let's just have the conversation and listen to one another.
I think that we have a problem here, and the problem is kicking problems down the road. We raid transportation funds, and then we say, we'll deal with it later. We are now approaching a crisis. My long life of hard work and varied experiences has taught me that we need to deal with problems now. And as we look at problems down the road, we can anticipate what it is we need, and we need to take actionable steps to address those. In terms of tolls, tolls are a regressive tax. We have expressed concern about the Alice population. 1/3 of our residents are struggling to make ends meet. Adding tolls will be another regressive tax. Alice population pays 24% of their income to taxes, whereas the super wealthy pay 6% of their income. That must change. Whoops. So much for water flowing.
Starting over? Okay. So here we have a little bit of a difference of opinion. Do I support Massachusetts, New York, and Rhode Island drivers to help support repairing our roads, maintaining them, and making our bridges and roads safe for all traffickers, particularly for those citizens of Connecticut? 100% I do. Jesse just mentioned the fact that we should institute some rebates or different cost structures for the Connecticut citizens. Well, we're the only state on the eastern seaboard that doesn't have a tolling system. And if you have driven recently in any of them, you'll notice they have different price structures. I'm going to take advantage of this time-wise. Different price structures, as well as potential rebates on taxes. The research has been done. We don't need any more studies. We can look to the studies that have been done for us already, several in the past couple of years. In addition, we can look to all the other states on the eastern seaboard. Being the land of steady habits isn't always a good thing, and we are starved for revenue, and leaving money on the table is not a good idea when we have ways to keep the citizens of Connecticut protected while we get help from the out-of-staters that are constantly using our highways. Also, vote for the proposition to have a lockbox.
So I mentioned earlier in my opening statement some of the things that were accomplished because both parties were in the room. I just want to remind you, both parties were in the room. We kicked the governor out of the room when we were talking about this budget and putting it together. And one of the things, besides the spending cap, and I can talk about the bonding cap and all kinds of other things, but one of the elements that the Republican caucus has been talking about is a plan called Prioritize Progress. And if we were to implement it fully, we wouldn't need tolls. We implemented it partially in the last budget, and we prioritized $100 million for transportation costs. How do we do that? Because we're prioritizing within general obligation bonds so that we don't have any more earmarks and pet projects at the governor's disposal. So you know the governor has doubled bonding in his tenure from $1.9 billion with a B every year to $3.8 billion with a B. And yet we can't find money for our transportation system. It's called prioritizing your tax dollars, and that's something I'm going to be fighting for every step of the way.
So transportation has two aspects. One is the current roads and bridges that we have that are in terrible shape. And Essex has done a lot of work repairing some of them, in some cases with no state money or no federal money, and in some cases with some federal money. The federal money always makes the bridge cost more. The state money always makes the bridge cost more. And I think that we need to figure out a way to fund all that properly. I think we also need, for the 21st century, to build out a much more developed mass transportation infrastructure. That is what the younger people that we want to attract to our state want. The I-91 corridor needs to be a mass transportation corridor that's high-speed, efficient, and affordable. I'm for the lockbox reluctantly, not reluctantly, sadly, because it is sad that the legislature has never been able to live within its bounds, and the governors either. So I think we need it. I actually agree with what Jesse said, that I'm not sure that we're going to ever get away without having tolls. I'm not for them. I remember the years of tolls. But in the end, I suspect that there's going to be no other way to fund them short of tolls, but not the plan the DOT put out.
So I'm in favor of safe roads and bridges. I drive 2 hours every day on 95 and 395 to work. And I'm tired of seeing Massachusetts and New York and Rhode Island drivers using our roads for free. They're putting the same wear and tear on them that we are. And I know that we have a gas tax right now, but we also have more and more electric vehicles, and they're not paying anything in terms of gas tax to fix our roads. So I think that electronic tolling with discounts or tax rebates for in-state residents, people that have to go over the Baldwin Bridge, for example, every single day to get to and from work, that's a plan that we can put into place, but we need to bring revenue in to fix our roads and bridges, because 76% of our roads and bridges have a C rating or lower, and we don't want to have the kind of accident that we've had here that has hung on Connecticut's hearts and memories for many years. So we need to get things going in the right direction.
So I'm the ranking member of the Transportation Committee, and I've been dealing a lot with toll issue, with the issue of deficient roads and bridges in our state. The problem with the tolling plan that was put forward this past year by the commissioner of DOT, by the governor, and the Transportation Committee Democrat leaders is there would have been tolls everywhere. There would have been tolls on 9, 8, 11, 2, 95, 84, 91, and the Merritt Parkway. Having all of those tolls would have meant that Connecticut residents, Connecticut drivers, would have been responsible for about 70% of all of the costs of tolling, even with the proposed discounts, because the DOT and the governor were looking at this from a revenue perspective. They weren't looking at this from a perspective of fairness. Certainly, I would love to see out-of-state drivers paying more to use our roads in general. But if tolls are going to be in the discussion, it has to make sense for Connecticut drivers. It has to be fair for Connecticut drivers. We pay one of the highest gas taxes in the country. You can't add one of the highest gas taxes plus tolls everywhere on Connecticut drivers. We just pay enough and can't take any more.
Yes, Mr. McLaughlin.
I just want to briefly respond. Mr. Lehman did mention that I said that tolls are inevitable. I just want to clarify, I don't believe that tolls are inevitable. I just think we should talk about a real plan that works for Connecticut residents, not one that stretches people even further and forces more people to leave the state due to an extra bill of $200 a week in tolling costs. So I just want to clarify that. And another point I wanted to briefly make is I do agree with my opponent that we don't need any more studies. And that's why I stood with many of my colleagues to oppose the governor's action on the bond committee to borrow $10 million of taxpayer money for a toll implementation study, which I just think was such a ludicrous spending of money. We have enough information. We just need to talk to one another. And if you send me back to Hartford, I will continue to fight these ludicrous policies that are wasting your money.
I'll let you comment, but let me throw in something before you do, because it ties into a couple of the comments about studies. I was intrigued to read the other day that, in fact, a lot of people are saying, "Oh, let's put tolls on the out-of-state truckers," and in fact, the fact is that out-of-state truckers actually pay money because their diesel gas taxes, I guess that's kind of their diesel taxes, their truck fees, et cetera, are divided among all of the states based on the proportion of time that they spend in each state. So in fact, we get a lot of money from that. In addition, trucks tend to deliver and bring and take from areas that are local, and therefore, by putting taxes on them, it may increase the cost of goods that could inure to the detriment of the very people whose roads they're traveling on. So it's a little more complicated. So in light of that, I just wanted to ask the question before you keep going with your discussion, even with a show of hands. The governor did seek to have a $10 million study. The governor also made a very interesting comment at the end where he said, this isn't really going to happen until after I'm out of office, suggesting that it might get reversed by a later legislature and governor. So let me just ask you, how many of you, I'll give you three choices. One would vote to not have the study, two would vote to have the study, and three think you need more information before you can make the decision. So let me first, how many folks would absolutely vote to not have the $10 million study? He's saying he's not a fan. He's not a fan of that phrasing. Well, as you're going to then get to comment on it, but
Yeah, okay.
but so there are two, Mr. Puglisi and Mr. Needleman, who are not saying that they would like to do away with the $10 million study.
No. I would like to do.
You got to use your microphone, Mr. Neal.
I can't even hear myself. I'm sorry, and I do have laryngitis. I think that the question is, do we want to do it the way the governor did it? Do we think that that's an appropriate grab of money the way he did it? And I do not. I learned a long time ago, you don't put the cart before the horse. If you're going to approve tolls, then you figure out the right way to do it. Maybe we have enough information based on what I've heard and what I've seen from the DOT plan. I do not believe we do. I don't think that plan would work. And generally speaking, any kind of tolling, however you do it, it's the last and worst alternative.
And Mr. Puglisi?
And I'd like to add, I very much agree with what Mr. Carney said earlier. I think that the 77 proposed locations are way more than we need as we're looking at tolling. But the reason I won't say that I'm just fundamentally against doing the study is everybody has said we need to figure out the right way. In some way, figuring out the right way means studying the issue and doing calculations and figuring out what the best plan is. So I'm against what the governor did, but we need to figure out the right way to do it.
Okay, and I'm opening up now to other comments about transportation generally or tolls. Transportation, clearly, for a state like Connecticut, almost everybody for at least 30 years has recognized it as a key issue for this state. So go ahead.
Thank you. So one of the things that Governor Malloy has done over the last 8 years is stopped consulting with the Transportation Development Authority. And if we could reinstitute that, it would take the politics out of which projects are going to be built and which ones should be prioritized. Because one of the things that happened is the governor said, hey, we're gonna need to spend $100 billion on transportation plans, and then came up with all these projects, but never actually identified the revenue to pay for those projects. So we need to go back to proper planning and take the politics out of that. Secondly, I just want to make sure you folks understand that in Rhode Island that are currently doing the truck-only tolls, one of the nominees for governor is saying, I can do that, and I'm going to get $100 million in revenue, and that's going to save the day. Well, the reality is in Rhode Island, they're only raising a little over $23 million a year. And don't forget, if we were to put that here without a reciprocal agreement, we could actually have out-of-state folks never pay their fair share, because if they don't have an agreement, they don't have to pay the tolling fee. So those are some things we really need to think about. There's plenty of plans out there. There's plenty of studies out there. We don't need another one.
Mr. Adler?
So I just want to make it clear, I'm hearing a lot of ideas for plans and how the legislature can fix problems and use your money more wisely. This is brought to you by the same people who instituted the income tax in the first place to deal with the retirement benefits problem that's now a crisis. And I say now sarcastically. It's been a crisis since Weicker was governor. People have a spending problem, and there is a revenue problem as well. Things need to be in lockboxes because right now the legislature cannot be trusted to manage your money well. We do need less of a tax burden on the citizens of Connecticut, but we also need to use the money that we are going to raise more wisely. We need it. We need it for the services that we all depend on. We need it for the ALICE individuals who live in our communities. We need it for the public transportation that will hopefully allow us to compete more with the big cities that we otherwise could never compete with. We need to grow our population, and we need to invest in our future to do so. One of the ways we can do that in public transportation and our roads and bridges is through tolls. I agree, we need to take the politics out of it. Unfortunately, the reason why it was left to and not put in the last session was simply because of politics. It is going to be necessary. We need to do it smartly. We need to do it together, but to talk about it as an afterthought, saying, well, we'll come to that bridge when we get there, that bridge might not be there because it doesn't have the funding to stand. So I just want to make sure that we are all on the same page. This is coming. We need to do it smartly, and we are the last on the Eastern Seaboard.
Anybody else feel a need to, okay, Mr. Carney.
Okay, thank you very much. So first of all, I definitely think that $10 million for the toll study was a huge waste of money. Well, you know, it's almost reminded me of Governor Malloy as Nero playing the fiddle while the city of Rome burned. We don't have the money for things like that. But a little bit about policy. So as ranking member of transportation, I saw bills related to tolls. Senator Bob Duff, who's the Democrat Senate Majority Leader and Speaker of the House, Jarvis Simowitz, wanted to pass the buck and create a new highway department that was responsible for creating tolls, creating the rates, implementing them, maintaining them, and essentially taking that responsibility away from the legislature. At the same time, the Transportation Committee Democrat leaders wanted to institute a legislation that basically said, okay, we're gonna do this study, and then only the Transportation Committee has to vote on it once we see a plan. And if they don't vote on, if the full legislature doesn't vote on it within 30 days, it just becomes law. All three of those ideas are bad. They're bad politics. They're bad for the state of Connecticut. And I'm very concerned that if Speaker Simowitz or Senator Duff had more allies in the state legislature, that things like that would pass, and we'd have a highway department, another layer of bureaucracy, just like the airport authority, just like the DMV, that's going to make decisions for the state of Connecticut without hearing from the legislature. We can't do that. If we're going to look at tolls, it's got to be the legislature's got to look at it. The legislature's got to approve a plan. The legislature's got to make the policy necessary to do what's right for the Connecticut residents and not more bureaucracy on behalf of state government.
So again, I would agree absolutely with the fact that the more we give to the bureaucracy, the worse the state is. The bureaucracy takes mediocre or decent laws and turns them into a horror show all the time. And we all pay the price. I think that the bureaucracy is what really needs to be looked at in the state, and some of the enabling legislation. But even when legislation doesn't pass, they take things unto themselves. I also want to mention that in the last budget, which I thought was not a good budget, they raided the Green Energy Fund. So that's another one where there's a lawsuit going on right now because money was taken out of the Green Energy Fund and spent and put into the general fund, and that was all the money that went to serve the public and businesses for renewable energy.
Okay, I'd like to open it up now for a couple of questions from the audience before we ask any more from the Council of Beaches. Darlene, have you got the microphone? Yeah, raise your hand. Get the microphone, and we'll do it in order of the hands I saw. So first the gentleman there, the woman over there, and then the two up front. And I may break off between those questions for another one from the council. Over here, Darlene, on this side. Gentleman was glad. There you go. Yep. And sir, actually, when you're done, why don't you hand it to the woman over there, so she'll be ready the next time. Thank you.
Okay, John Lysdell from Old Line. I think my question, but can't hear you.
Chris doesn't normally get on TV, but, you know.
Thank you. Can you hear me now? My name is John Beisco. I'm from Old Lyme. 4 years ago, I asked this question at a debate in New London that was put on by the New London Day. At that time, I asked the question, I said, the Democrat Party has run the state of Connecticut for the last 30 years. I recognize that we've had governors that are Republicans, but the reality is, I think I heard a number today that at the Nader, there were 37 Republican state representatives. It's now in the low 70s.
Sir, I'm going to ask you to ask your question. I meant to say this before, and we don't have time for...
I'm sorry.
And this is to
My
get
question,
their views.
Yeah, I got it, I'm sorry. My question is, because the Democrat Party has run the state of Connecticut for 30 years, and it's in such, and I think all you agree, I didn't hear any
What's the
disagreement.
question, sir?
It's in such dismal state. Why would anybody vote for a Democrat?
Ma'am, why don't you ask your question as well, and then we'll see if they want to answer both questions.
My name is Sandra Matthews. I live in Old Saybrook. I lived in Boston for many, many, many years. I have a transponder from the state of Massachusetts that allows me to go in fast lanes with all the states that have transponders. So here I am riding in New York, New Jersey. I'm going through their tolls. I've got my transponder, but I pay my money to the state of Massachusetts. My account is in Massachusetts. So how does the money get back to New York and New Jersey? Because I use those tolls, but I'm paying through my account in Massachusetts. And the other thing, I'd just like a statement about the lockbox. I don't know if I would feel secure that all the money would stay in the lockbox when the lockbox in the federal government for Social Security gets raided all the time.
Okay,
Can we get our money back?
Please, if we start getting into everybody making their own comments, we won't hear from the candidates, which is the purpose of this. I hope somebody will take the time afterwards, unless somebody knows the answer quickly to her question, to take the time afterwards to respond to her question about the technicality of how the money gets there, because I don't think it's a policy issue for any of these candidates to have to decide. Do we have another question? Yeah. I had actually two people over here. Darlene? I'm
Okay.
sorry. But go ahead, ask, and then come on over here.
Just a quick correction. Little civics lesson.
Excuse me. No lessons. We want questions to the candidates.
The governor, no, after that, the governor is the one that has the power in the state of Connecticut, not the legislature. And basically, no, the governor ultimately makes decisions on the budget and makes the things, not the legislature. The legislature proposes budget, but the governor is ultimately the person. Therefore, we have really Republican governors, including our friend John Rowland, that have been out there. So
again, listen, folks, the idea here is to get the candidates' views on these issues. They will get to that, I'm sure, in talking about it. I wanted to give them more than one question to be able to respond to, not just the question about why we should not elect Democrats. Right over here, these two women.
Hi, I'm Delia Adorno. I'm from Westbrook, Connecticut. And my question pertains to the State Teacher Retirement Pension Fund. If the state is not able to meet the obligations to this fund, is that cost going to be passed on to the towns, or do you have any idea of how that is going to be handled?
Okay, I tell you what, let me ask you to respond to that question. You're welcome to respond to the other question that was asked as well. But in responding to that question, let me make it a little broader, not just about whether it is going to be passed on to the town, but if you want to more generally, how you propose to deal with the significant, as yet unfunded, liability and increasing liability every year. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start with the Senate candidates. We're then going to go over, so we're going to start with Ms. Gibran, go this way down to Mr. Carney, and then we'll catch the other end.
Thank you very much. And I just want to thank you for that question, because that, frankly, is something everybody should be very, very concerned about in the state of Connecticut. So in the last budget process, with Republicans and Democrats sitting at the table, we talked a lot about this. One of the things that happened in that budget process was we put a volatility cap in the budget. So any dollars over a certain amount of revenue would be automatically deposited in the rainy day fund. And that was very successful because we had a one-time repatriation of tax dollars. And believe it or not, right now, the rainy day fund has over $1 billion in it, and it's on record to even have more. But our plan would have taken the money in the rainy day fund and earmarked it, and it's easy to think about it in thirds. So a third of that rainy day fund would have gone to the teachers' retirement pension system. Another third would have gone to the state employee retirement system, and then we would have kept a third in the rainy day fund. It's critical for our bond rating. And doing those huge lump sum, hundreds of millions of dollars of payments to those funds would have been critically important, I think, for every taxpayer, not just the ones who are benefiting from that pension fund. It would have also saved the state of Connecticut taxpayers over $60 million a year in debt service by making those down payments. The Democrats, our friends on the other side, said, no, 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 we're not doing that. We want to leave all the money in the rainy day fund. So you should be asking yourself, who do you trust to steward over $1 billion in the rainy day fund in the next legislature? Do you trust somebody who would like to be able to pay down our unfunded debt, or do you trust somebody else who wants to start new programs? And I think that's one of the critical things every taxpayer and resident should be thinking about in the state of Connecticut.
Mr. Needleman.
Just want to get back to that toll thing for a minute. My understanding is when you use your New York or Massachusetts Easy Pass, the money for the tolls that you pay goes back to the state that you went through the tolls in. And I will tell you that it's funny that the town of Essex this year had a very similar situation to the state, which is unusual because we usually pay our bills. This year, we ran a very significant surplus. We lowered our mill rate. We didn't do it because we had over-budgeted cuts or under-budgeted revenue from the state last year. We get very little from the state. We just had more revenue because we've had more economic development in town, more people moving in, more construction, and much higher revenue than we anticipated. And we immediately put that money, about more than a third, I think more like 40% went in to pay up unfunded liabilities on pensions or underfunded liabilities. I think that that's what the state should be doing, and in no way, as a first selectman, would I accept having the state offload its inefficiency and its irresponsibility on the towns. I think that's the wrong way to go. I've heard some really crazy things out there from the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities. They had somebody come in with a proposal on pensions to offload the teacher pensions onto the towns with a 120% funding mandate, which would have put every single town in the state of Connecticut into bankruptcy. See, I don't know if everybody understands, but states can't go bankrupt. There's no way not to pay that money back. We owe it to the people that work for the state. You can try to negotiate in good faith, but you just cannot walk away from them. However, if you try to offload it onto the towns, towns can go bankrupt. So I think that any move by the state to do that would be irresponsible and inappropriate. And I think that's it for me right now.
So the first thing that I would do regarding the unfunded teachers' pension benefits is to refinance them the same way that last year the state refinanced the state employees, because we want to get that burden. Just like when you refinance the mortgage on your house, you want to spread that out. And the next thing that I would do is make sure that we're committing to spending the money towards funding these pension benefits. This is something that the legislature and the governors on both sides of the aisle have not done for years, and that's why we find ourselves in this situation. And then the third thing is that we need to focus on growing Connecticut's economy so we have more revenue coming in, and we need to look at cutting the wasteful spending that we have going on at the state level.
Thank you very much. So the issue with teachers' retirement is huge. And the governor and Speaker of the House, Joe Arasimowicz, tried to pass a third of those costs on municipalities. It would have drastically raised the mill rates in the 4 towns in the 23rd district and would have probably caused property tax increases, which we can't afford. What I would first do is implement zero-based budgeting. We've got to plug in our debt. We've got to pay off our debt. We can't keep kicking the can down the road, which is what the legislature did when they refinanced the state employee pensions. By refinancing the state employee pensions, it spread the costs out an additional 15 years, and it's going to end up costing taxpayers at this moment, which I'm sure will get worse, we know things always get worse, $11 billion more than what it would have cost if we paid off the state employee pension debt in a reasonable, responsible fashion. We have no choice but to pay the teachers' retirement off. We've got to do it. We've got to plug it in the budget and then build the budget there. We've got to improve retiree costs because a lot of these retired teachers are either gone or are considering moving to other states where the retirement cost of living is less expensive than the state of Connecticut, like Florida, like South Carolina. So we've got to grow our economy, but we cannot continue to kick the can down the road on the teachers' retirement, on state employee pensions, on debt service, or any of the enormous debt the state has been put in based on decades of mismanagement.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Awesome. Thank you very much. We've been talking about this all night, that our towns have been experiencing, particularly during Governor Malloy's administration, last-minute cuts, last-minute costs dropped on their plate during or before, right after budget season, meeting with municipal leaders. What I'm hearing is we don't know what is going to be dropped on us, and so we have to take extreme measures to make sure that there is enough reserve to handle these unexpected costs. I think the worst thing that we can do is surprise towns with the problems ahead of us, because make no mistake about it, we have a very difficult road ahead of us. We are facing a $5 billion deficit over the next 2 years because of 50 years worth of poor fiscal management, of not putting nearly enough investing in the futures of our retirees. We have to pay those bills. We made a promise to hardworking state employees, and we have to honor that. It's a moral issue, it's a financial issue. But moving forward, we need to change the way we budget. We have to start with how much we owe in debt and liabilities and go from there. We need to find ways to create efficiencies through public-private partnerships, by shrinking the workforce of state government through natural attrition. We have to learn how to be creative, or we will be handing over a bigger problem to the next generation, and that's why I do what I do, and I'd like to do my part to get a hold of it.
Okay, I'd like to remind you, we're still on a 1-minute rule
Time for me?
on all these responses. So if you hear the chime going off, please wrap it up. Yes, Ms. Lavelli.
Okay.
Lovely.
Thank
Lovely.
you very much. I am a retired teacher. I understand the fears of Connecticut's teachers of what could happen if the pension is not there. But as we have heard from my respected colleagues, the state has a moral obligation, and it will fulfill that. I agree that we need to stop kicking problems down the road. One of the issues that I'm concerned with, as a person who owns her own private practice, essentially a small business, is when I make estimates of revenue, I don't make wild estimates. I make conservative estimates, and we need to be making conservative estimates about the interest that will accrue to our savings. We need to be considering other ways of increasing our revenues, such as creating a state bank, which will allow us to have our monies invested in our infrastructure, in our state, and benefit our teachers and our retirees.
So along with Madeline and Matt, I am an educator. I'm a school counseling chair at Waterford High School. And I think it's rich, some of the things I'm hearing right now. Both parties and unaffiliated members have been kicking the can down the road for years. And I agree, we need to be fiscally conservative when we need to be, and we need to restrain growth of ridiculous portions of the government. Government can be a good, but overdoing it on government is not a good. A couple of years ago, the budget was fixed on the back of teachers. Public teachers in the state were asked to pay 1% more towards the retirement, which by itself is not a big deal. But we weren't asked. We were just deducted 1% from our salaries. The Republican plan had it doing it by 2%. So here's the thing. We don't think any unfunded mandate should be put on towns, and we don't think any unfunded tax liability should be put on to our citizens, specifically, and I am a little bit selfish here, our hardworking teachers who serve your students. Suddenly I have to make do, and my fellow teachers have to make do, with 1% less in our salary for retirement that we are not guaranteed because of what the fiscal mismanagement has been. We need to solve this, and we need to deal with it. In terms of the state employees, that was something that was a fixed contract. To alter it otherwise, without the consent of the state employees' unions, would have been a legal battle, costing more for the state. It already went into the 2020s by itself. And so instead of avoiding a balloon payment, as we all do sometimes on credit cards or interest rates, et cetera, they amortize it to go more into the future with fiscally manageable bills per month, like we all do when we refinance our houses or we look at our credit cards and look for that 0% interest.
Mr. Adler,
that's what we do. I'm just taking the time that everyone else took, sir.
Well, that's why we have the timer. Okay, next question. Okay, do we have another question from the audience? Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Got the mic.
You have the mic, go ahead.
My name is Joe Brusella. I'm a resident here in Westbrook. My wife and I have the advantage or disadvantage of being registered differently. So we have the advantage of getting political information from all the parties, get to read them. One thing I tend to notice common words in all of them, with a few exceptions, is the term middle class. Could the candidates be specific as to who they consider as the middle class in the districts that they serve or wish to serve?
Great. Okay. Thanks. Somebody else raise their hand so we can be ready with the next question. Okay. So let's see. This time what we'll do is we'll start from the far side, but start from Mr. Adler and go left to right.
I'm confused.
You're starting.
We're going here?
Yes.
Fair enough. Okay. So pretty much if you ask anyone on the street if they're middle class, they're middle class. No one says that they're upper class because they worked hard for their money. And the reality is we all work hard for our money. Right now, in bringing the Alice conversation in perhaps a little earlier than was anticipated, I believe that the minimal household income for a family of four, the maximum that you could earn while still being qualified for Alice is in the mid-70,000s for our district. I consider that middle class salary, but guess what? That's Alice. That means that anything that happens within your life, whether it's a car repair or a house repair, can put you on the street. So I would have thought close to $100,000 is middle class. I would have thought $50,000 was middle class. And part of being in this campaign and learning about Alice and learning about the needs of our communities is middle class is under attack, and the middle class folks don't have places to live, or if they can't afford it, it's at the whims of things that can happen randomly in life to us all. And we need to be able to offer them affordable housing and take care of the middle class in other ways as well.
I agree with my colleague Jason Adler of the definition of middle class. I think it's important that we need to recognize that our basic rights and basic fairness have been challenged. In 1979, when I was starting my practice, minimum wage was proportionately and significantly higher than minimum wage today. The income inequality in our country has risen more than tenfold. And if we look historically at countries in which there is increasing economic disparity, there is the beginning of an erosion of societal bonds and of society holding together. We must, in looking at our tax structure, look at fair taxes for all. Fair taxes for the working class, the middle class, and fair share taxing for our wealthy citizens in the state.
Thank you. The middle class takes many forms in my communities. It's the family dropping their kids off at school before going to work a 10-hour day, because let's be honest, nobody works an 8-hour day anymore. It's the senior citizen couple who is having a hard time dealing with the rising cost of living on a fixed income. It's the family looking to sell their home, but they can't find a buyer because Connecticut is becoming too expensive of a place to find an attractive, to find folks that want to move in. It's the recent college graduate who is leaving school full of hope, but with a $40,000 liability on their back, needing to look for work in South Carolina and North Carolina and Massachusetts. It takes many different forms, the middle class, and the best thing that we can do is get our fiscal house in order and start reversing the damage that's been caused over the last 50 years to make Connecticut a place where businesses can thrive, where people can find meaningful work and actually afford to live in this beautiful state of ours. Thank you.
Okay, so middle class. So when I think of the middle class, I think of my mom. My mom's here tonight. She comes to all my things. She's probably my biggest supporter. I think of my mom. My mom worked really hard. She's worked really hard over the last several decades. She doesn't make a ton of money, but she makes enough to get by, to go on vacation when she can, to get a decent car, to live in a decent home. She got to put me through a great education by going to Old Saybrook Public Schools and worked to make sure that I always had any resources I needed. We didn't have anything extravagant, but we had what we needed. And these are the folks, like my mom, like people who start their own small businesses, like people in the manufacturing and the trades who are like that, who look at buying a home. That's a huge accomplishment. Or buying a new car is a huge accomplishment. And we're squeezing as a state. The state is squeezing those people out of Connecticut. Those people can't afford to buy a house here anymore. They can't afford to retire here. They can't afford to raise kids here anymore. And those are the very people that make the economy go, and people like my mom. So we've got to make sure we can keep those people here and have policies to do it.
The middle class in our communities is made up, as all of my colleagues have said, so many different people. It's my brother and sister-in-law working hard and not being able to put enough money away to plan for their kids' future. It's our senior citizens that are living on a fixed income. It's the recent college graduate that is trying to figure out a place that they can rent. The middle class is the Main Street hardware store owner in Old Saybrook. The middle class is the small business owner. We have many people in Old Saybrook Public Schools, in all of the schools, that are growing on free and reduced lunch need. We have families that are living out of motels because that's the best place that they can afford to live, and they're working full-time jobs. So we have to really focus on policies that are growing and supporting the middle class, despite what they might look like and what their exact income might be, so that they can live here in Connecticut and thrive.
Mr. Needleman?
So I think that in the post-World War II era, the middle class in America flourished and grew, and something radically changed, like Madeline said, in the early 1980s. And I think it was substantial changes to the federal tax code more than the state tax code. And I have watched, even in my own business, I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I don't think anybody would call me middle class at this point. I'm not. I've been very fortunate, but I have watched as my customers, because I sell to every retailer in the United States, I have watched as the food chain has gone down, and everybody with every recession has moved down the food chain from better stores to 99-cent stores now. And I think that that's a function of our tax code that has rewarded affluence and has penalized hard work. I think that this country and this state needs a much more progressive tax code. I think that we have hurt people that work for a living and have rewarded people who move money around and financialized our economy.
So thank you. I think one difference you heard between me and my opponent tonight is I am certainly in the middle class category. I have worked very hard with my husband and our 2 children, but you know, we make ends meet. I'm probably in this race the only person who's had to shop at Goodwill for clothes for my kids and make those sacrifices early on so that you can afford to prioritize our dollars in our household, which is our college education for our kids. My 12-year-old vehicle, I've put 10,000 miles on it since March visiting this district. It's so beautiful. We can do more, but I am proud of some of the things we did in the last budget. You should know that we prioritized $31 million for a program called Care for Kids. And Care for Kids is a wonderful program that supports working families so that we can help pay for quality daycare while those folks are able to go to work. And it's those kinds of policies we need to continue to support.
Thank you. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to follow up that question with something more specific. It's a question that the Council of Beaches sent you last week, and I'm going to leave out the preface because we've already talked about Alice and just ask the question, which is, what steps have you taken or will you take to address the needs of the Alice population, including affordable housing, business and job development, and training? And for this, what I'd like to do is we're going to start with the state Senate candidates. We'll go from left to right. So we'll go, no, from audience is left, sorry. Start with Mr. Needleman.
Oh, Mr. Needleman.
I'll never get that correct. So I think that the whole Alice population is under threat, just like the middle class, and I'm not sure that there's much of a difference. I think you heard that before. My opponent shopping at Goodwill is a statement about that, and I think that that's quite unfortunate. Although I wouldn't take a salary as a legislator, I think that we don't pay our legislators an adequate salary to live on, and I think that they probably deserve more because it's a very difficult job. I think that there are foundational aspects of what creates a middle class, and one of them is the minimum wage. And I have not heard or seen one Republican in the last 10 years that's ever supported an increase in the minimum wage. To me, that's a travesty. I don't know what the minimum wage and making sure that people make a decent minimum wage has always been foundational, and today it's like not even foundational, it's an assumption. I also think that we need to make sure we have affordable housing in this area in order for people to be able to live here.
So I spoke earlier about the Care for Kids program. Certainly that's one policy, but I just want to say I don't want my opponent to feel sorry for me. I want to tell you a story about how I had my daughter view these kinds of things. So when she was in 6th grade, we were at Goodwill and we were getting designer jeans. She went to school, this young girl saw her and said, "Oh my gosh, I have those same jeans. We just got them yesterday and I paid $50 for them." And my daughter turned to her on a dime and said, "Really? Because I just paid $4 for mine." So I will instill that kind of fiscal discipline all day long, whether I have the money or I don't. And that's the same viewpoint I take when I go to the Capitol, the same exact viewpoint. You need somebody who's looking at things differently. Even if we could afford it, should we? We need to prioritize those things because let's face it, when I have traveled, and I mentioned 10,000 miles on my car, our campaign has knocked on 10,000 doors. We have an iceberg situation. You see for sale signs, but there's hundreds and hundreds of people who can't afford to live in our beautiful state anymore. It's very sad. That's what's sad.
Okay, Mr. Adler.
So I just want to correct the record that Melissa sort of spelled out there. My wife had to leave teaching when our son was unexpectedly born with a chronic illness, hemophilia. We could not afford daycare for my son because it would require a nurse to make sure that he wouldn't hurt and bleed himself out to death. So we have had lived on a salary. We were not expecting to live on one salary. We worked very hard, but you know what? Wealthy people work really hard too, as do the poor and as do the Alice residents of our community. I mentioned before that the average Alice is considered to be $77,000 approximately that you need to make so that one instance, one trouble, one thing in your life has to go wrong, such as a child born with a chronic illness, to put you out on the street. And it's 33% in Westbrook, it's 35% in Clinton, and 17% in Killingworth. My Republican colleagues, well, not colleagues yet, on the table for you, voted against housing privileges for the working class last session. We need to have more working class housing. Call it affordable housing, call it what you will. We're talking about middle class housing. We also need to very much discuss a working living wage in this state. Whatever that is, I don't know, but we need to talk about it because, as everyone else has said, people are struggling and they're working 40 plus hours a week, and that's not okay by me.
I agree with my respected colleagues, and I will call you colleagues.
All right. Well, we are colleagues.
I think that I remember as a child, one of my most exciting things was when my mother would come home from the consignment shop and I'd have an Easter outfit. And I must tell you, I've continued that tradition. And I believe in collaborative consumerism. And I believe in being creative and expending our monies wisely. One of the issues that I do not think that we have addressed here was the issue of fear. And the fear is that the wealthy will depart our state and we will be bereft of their taxed revenues. What we know from statistical studies at Stanford, a well-respected institution, although not Yale, is that the wealthy people are not the people leaving. It is the people who are earning between $50,000 and $100,000 that are leaving. We need not to be held hostage. We need fair taxation for the super wealthy and hedge fund managers, and we need to be creative with the resources we have.
Thank you. I think all of us here, and I mean all of us, have experienced hard times where we've had to cut back and make sacrifices. I was so fortunate to have to be raised by a hardworking single father who started his own business, and we went through our own tough times. And I believe that what we need to do, and what I've been proud to be a part of, is support budgetary measures that look out for the most vulnerable among us, while also creating useful, attainable pathways to higher quality of life. That's what we're all after, is the pursuit of happiness and a high quality of life for ourselves, our family, and our children. And I think the way you do that is by addressing workforce preparedness. We need to look at shifting away from the idea that a four-year degree is the only way forward to a high quality of life, and looking at supporting vocational training. How can we make sure that young people don't graduate with the cost of a mortgage on their back before entering adulthood? How can we do that? And I think the way that you do that is by pairing businesses with educators to make sure that we are preparing young people for the needs of the economy.
Okay. First off, I really want to thank the community-based groups like the Shoreline Basic Needs Task Force and the Economic Action Group for all of their efforts. It's that collaborative, community-based type of ideas coming out from those that I think really make a difference. And whether I win or lose, I'd like to be a part of that. But a few things that I've supported up at the State House that would benefit and will benefit folks in the Alice demographic is certainly the Connecticut Apprenticeship Initiative, which seeks to identify and train up to 10,000 unemployed or underemployed residents and things things like manufacturing, healthcare, construction. EB's hiring. The Lee Company out of Westbrook, a phenomenal company, treats its employees extremely well. They're hiring. A lot of times they can't find the in-state talent they need. I preserve public education for this public transportation, I apologize, for this area by saving funds for Ninetown Transit and Shoreline East, so that didn't get cut and fares go up. Financial literacy is another thing we should look at. I supported a bill for an optional course for our public schools to teach in financial literacy, things like student loans, credit cards, mortgages, things like that. And finally, more predictability and stability in state budgets and regulations on small businesses. We've got to eliminate some of these so small businesses can grow, hire more people, and raise their wages.
It makes me sick that we have families that live in our community that work full-time jobs, multiple jobs, and they can't afford to live here. We need to look at policies that are going to support them and allow them to thrive and have more people living here in our community. Paid family leave. When my daughter was born, I had to go to work the next day because I couldn't afford to take the time off. I didn't have a paternity leave policy at my place of employment. We've all had that situation in our life where a family member gets ill. It's planning for the unexpected and being income constrained and not being able to do what you need to, and that puts you into a place of terror. So you need to make sure that you're supporting your people in the community. Higher education, as my opponent said, we need to look at expanding the community college programs that are going to connect people to employment and local employers like EB at the Lee Company. We have advanced manufacturing training programs at community colleges here that we need to make strategic investments to make sure that we're providing the talented workforce for our local businesses.
Thank you all. Before we go on to the next question, I just want to put another plug again. If any of you would like to be involved in these kinds of efforts, please put on your calendars November 29th, 6 o'clock here. Get in touch with Tony Koza, who's in the back over there, raise your hand, or me after the meeting, or Jim Crawford, who most of you know, who's here, and we'll make sure you get on the mailing list, the email list. I'm sorry, you want to respond?
Can we follow up to that?
Sure, absolutely.
There are three incumbent legislators at this table, and I would like to ask, which of the three of you have voted to increase the minimum wage? Well, I'm just wondering, I'd like to know who supports a minimum wage, increasing the minimum wage.
I think the people who made the comment that they supported the minimum wage around the table were not the legislators. I think people noted
right.
that.
Okay. I just.
Can I just say this?
Go ahead.
So that's okay. We can go there. So the other side of the aisle has supported tying the minimum wage to the Consumer Price Index, CPI. And that's been an amendment that's been filed before. It's not been supported by the other side, and this becomes a political football. But the reality is, even if we were to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, based on the studies of the folks who have been talking about this, you need to make $24 an hour. So where does it end? And I think that these conversations need to continue to happen at the Capitol, but to say that the legislators here have never supported anything, when the fact is we have had issues related to tying it to CPI. Thank you.
Let me ask you a question. Again, you can continue to talk about minimum wage if you want, but I'd also like to ask you, there was a discussion over the last 2 years about cutting the technical schools, cutting funding for the technical high schools. So I guess in considering this answer, I'd love to hear your views on whether or not that's something that should be considered or should be soundly rejected or anything in between. Because that's, directly addressing a lot of the issues of job training and job preparedness for the future that a lot of you have talked about, and yet there was a lot of discussion about that. It almost went through without a lot of opposition. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Adler, you can start and go ahead and take it.
Well, as a school counseling chair, I'm pretty well aware of the different options that students have for them. And no, technical schools should absolutely not be cut. What I have an issue with are the charter schools and magnet schools that the state seems to love spending money on. And I think if you did a popularity poll of Governor Malloy, you'd probably find pretty unanimous sentiment up here. And I think you could probably guess which way it goes. The money is being spent in such a way that now public institutions have to spend money to advertise themselves for the students in the 8th grade, in the 5th grade, in order to compete with other schools. Now, I understand capitalism is what this country is founded on, and in business, that makes a lot of sense. But guess what? In public education, it doesn't. We need to invest in our public schools, and we need, as many of the folks up here had said, to prepare kids for the workforce in addition for college. I work in a primarily college prep school, but every single planning session I have with my kids is always about what works for you. And right now, being right next to EB, I'm offering a lot of them the option of going to Three Rivers, which is a community college out there, get trained, and then they get a starting salary probably close to mine. And we need to recognize that college is one option to success, not the only one. And we need to recognize that we need to put our funds where they'll be best utilized for our children's futures.
Others?
In my earlier career, I worked at Greater New Haven State Technical College. And I believe in technical education on the high school level and on the collegiate level. In my career now, I see many people who buy into the idea of going to a private technical school, a trade school, and they do not have the skills to succeed in those schools, and what they end up with are loans they cannot pay back and no jobs. We as a state must do a better job of informing our young people of what opportunities there are and provide them through our public school and public college system the skills. We need to be more flexible in what we describe as training. It doesn't have to be an associate degree. It can be a 10-week program, but it is a program that will provide jobs.
Thank you. I briefly touched on the importance of vocational education in previous comments, but no, I do not believe that cutting funding for our vocational education centers is the right way forward to preparing a workforce for an economy that's changing so fast every single day. It's really important that we also embrace a lifetime of learning, not just entering a program, receiving skills, and entering the workforce, because the economy is changing. Businesses are adopting new technologies. It's important to take the approach that we should never stop learning more skills that allow ourselves to ply our trade in the workforce and achieve a very high quality of life. So I think it's really important that we not only look to oppose some of Governor Malloy's policies that have cut vocational schools, but also look at more creative ways to instill in young people and those in the workforce already a lifetime of skill acquisition.
Anybody else? Yeah, go ahead.
I certainly support investing in manufacturing programs in our technical schools. I mean, it's a way to train people in jobs that are in demand, like UTC, Electric Boat, the Lee Company, et cetera. And that's exactly where we need to be training our folks, including new technologies and innovation. We've got to really turn this economy around, and we could do that through job growth by training folks in in-demand jobs and new technologies. Just one point, though. I appreciate Mr. Needleman's sentiments. Not every business owner is as successful as him. Not every business owner has the resources he has. Small businesses in this state are being squeezed. They're going to other states, or they're just giving up. I can tell you, I'm sure increasing the minimum wage is inevitable, but businesses, if you increase it rapidly to $15 an hour, businesses like the Saybrook Point Inn, businesses like Water's Edge, many stores, many restaurants in this area will certainly lay people off. And we can't afford to have people unemployed. So I think right now we've got to take a break and let business come back. Let the budget come back before even considering more regulations on business.
I support funding our vocational schools. I work up at UConn right now, and I believe that there are a variety of styles of education that are needed. We need to be training our young people for the careers of the future. That's the most important thing. And so that means that we need to start to shift the conversation so that a four-year degree isn't looked at as the required next step. There are wonderful training programs at the community college level, vocational high schools, online programs such as Coursera, and other things that are preparing students for the digital technologies of the future, and that's what we need to be doing.
Okay, thank you. What I'd like to do now is take two more questions. One, Eileen, you'll be the first one on, and then the gentleman up here. We'll take the two questions. The candidates can answer either or both of those questions because this is really probably going to be the last set of questions we're going to have. So, okay, Eileen Baker, who is a longtime member of the Old Saybrook School Board. Go ahead.
So good evening, Eileen Baker. I live in Old Saybrook. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. And my question actually, let me backtrack before my question. I actually serve on the board of directors of the Connecticut Association for Boards of Education. So my question is, when we lobby our senators and our legislators, we're trying to educate them in terms of fully funding public school, fully funding special education, fully funding early childhood programs. That's where it starts. I appreciate your conversation about technical schools. So my question for each one of you is, where are you in terms of fully funding public education, equal cost sharing? Where are you in terms of fully funding special education the federal government has not given their commitment toward, and fully funding early childhood programs? Talking about the lockbox, those of us that have lived here long enough know that the lottery was started and the money that was going to go to the lottery was going to be put toward public education. And someone or group of people took the money out and there's no money there. So I'm holding all of you responsible to take a look at why that happened. And I'd like to know your answers.
Okay, and then there was Darlene, there was a gentleman up here who's on the aisle. By the way, as you're answering that question, also, if you can comment about the idea of state picking up total funding for special education. Go ahead.
Good evening. My name is David Lom. I'm from Lyme, Connecticut, and I have a very simple question: how are you going to fix the DMV? That's a quality of life issue.
I don't know if you saw the article. There was an article in The Current not too long ago about how both gubernatorial candidates for a while they were focusing on the DMV because it was the one thing that they thought everybody in the state agrees on. And it was pointed out that that from a financial standpoint, it's a tiny drop in the bucket. But quality of life, it's a different issue. Anyhow, so feel free to comment on either of those two questions. We'll start down at the end with Mr. McLaughlin and move all the way up here.
Thank you for your questions. Representative Carney made a really great point, and I agree, is we should start with zero-based budgeting when we sit down to decide where we spend our money. How we spend our money is a reflection of our priorities. So once you get through all the money you owe our banks after 50 years of poor borrowing practices and making sure that our retiree liabilities are covered, where do you go from there? Well, in my view, you start with the core essentials of government, one of which I believe is making sure that we properly educate young people. I'm a proud former public school student. I went to the Westbrook schools. Jim Crawford was my 7th grade teacher and was one of the reasons why I got into politics. Thanks, Jim. And so I think that there's no conversation forward that doesn't include making sure that we don't prepare young people for the future. And building on from there, what are your other priorities? One of it is transportation. Let's talk about the disaster that is the DMV. If I had a magic wand, I would like to see us create a public-private partnership with AAA or the private sector who can more efficiently deal with the long lines and the inefficiencies that we're seeing in the DMV. I went and got a license renewal and it took 15 minutes. And I think we could see more of that. Yes, sir. At AAA.
As a nationally certified school psychologist, I've worked in school systems and I have seen the directors of special education cringe when a family of 5 children with special needs moves into the district. That is enough to sink the special education budget of a town. I think we need to reorganize and look at our towns. We have 169 towns in Connecticut and more school systems than that. We need to be able to provide creative services to our students. We need to start to be thinking about some type of regionalization where students will have greater opportunities. And we need to be funding special education as a statewide issue. Thank you.
So, obviously, I'm a current employee of a public school system, so I am very in favor of fully funding public education. I also happen to be the union president, and when I'm negotiating on contracts with my superintendent, who is a supporter of my campaign, by the way, I do it with the conscious mindset that in order for the teachers to thrive, and more importantly, the students to thrive, the town has to be fiscally stable. And what I have seen in my short time, I've only been a teacher for 16 years now, the special education laws in the state and the special education budgets are out of control. And we need to find some way of being fair to the students who need special services in a fiscally responsible way. One way, I agree with Madeline, is looking at potential regionalization of services. That probably is not going to be enough, however. We need to get creative. We need to support our teachers and our students because they are the future. I want to go back to our previous question for 1 second. We concentrate very much on 21st century skill sets. I actually believe about 18th century skill sets are what we need to teach in schools today. No applause. We need to make sure we know how to shake hands, how to write resumes, how to have resiliency to pick ourselves up after we get fired, hopefully not, or how to get in a job interview after you failed at several others. These are the skills we need to teach. We need to teach social emotional skills in addition to the hardcore subjects that we have always dedicated ourselves to. But in order to do that, we need full funding.
Ms. Giron?
Thank you. So the two questions, DMV and education funding. DMV is an easy question for me. That was one of the very first bills I put in as a state representative to privatize DMV. There's a problem there, one of which, if you get into the I call it doing the deeper dive in the state budget, you'd be shocked to know that the technology that you, the taxpayer, have purchased for DMV wasn't good enough for them to get it up and running, so they've been running 2 computer systems simultaneously. So you talk about some issues at DMV, I agree, and I'll probably, if I have the pleasure of representing this beautiful district, put that bill in again. Talking about education funding, when I was a freshman on the Appropriations Committee, I was shocked that we had chairmen on the Appropriations Committee padding the budget to make sure their communities got extra money at the expense of everybody else. And there's specific examples of that. So last year, I'm very proud, it took a lot of work. We developed the first ever fair and balanced ECS formula. That is, every town knows now, if they look at that formula, what to expect for education funding. It's fair and balanced, and I hope we continue to do that, and we don't go back to the days where a special legislator gets to give millions at the expense of others.
Thank you. Devin hurt my feelings by not mentioning my company because we haven't been able to find key people in our manufacturing area. And I met with the people from Middlesex Community College 15 years ago to try to talk about apprentice programs, and they were not interested. I think that there needs to be a focus on that. As far as the DMV goes, I actually think that the towns are a waiting vessel to be able to actually manage that. Most functions that we do, the town clerk or the tax collector could easily handle the DMV work. As far as the budget, I appreciate that they worked on the ECS formula last year, and that ECS formula gave Greenwich more money while it cut revenue to every single town in our district, and that's 12 towns. The aggregate spending cut was quite significant. And I think that our ECS formula, as well as how we fund special education, is a travesty. I actually do believe that the state needs to pick up the cost for special education.
I believe in fully funding public education. How we spend our money does reflect our priorities, and we've heard over and over tonight from everybody how important it is to educate and train our young people, to support them so that they can be employed and live here and put down roots in Connecticut. I think that special education, we need to be looking at funding that at the state level as well. And early childhood education, studies have shown that one of the most predictive indicators of a child's lifetime success is the quality of their kindergarten teacher. So we need to look at that not just in the towns in our district, but we also need to look at this across the state. because the fact that every town is different, if we have such great income inequality in our state and the quality of the education between different towns, it's not going to move Connecticut forward if we have great schools in one district and then you move one town over and the schools are drastically different. So we need to look at doing this in a way that is balanced and supportive of the whole state.
Thank you. Two great questions. First, on the education, I certainly support having the state pick up some of the costs for special education. It is very expensive. In terms of fully funding education, support that, but towns that don't receive a lot of educational aid or next to nothing, like the 4 towns in the district I represent, I think have to have a little bit more freedom to make financial decisions, maybe free of some unnecessary mandates, especially in light of declining enrollment and things like that. The state simply really doesn't seem to want to give up that power, but it certainly likes to cut these districts. In terms of the Department of Motor Vehicles, we certainly need more innovation. We could use some kiosks. They opened a new kiosk in Milford for license renewals. I think some public-private innovation is good, but every time we bring that up, the unions fight it because all they care about is their jobs, not necessarily good customer service at the DMV. I think we need a business person running the DMV. The last 3 DMV commissioners have all been political people. The most recent one, all he's ever had is a political job up in Hartford. The one before him was a state senator who completely destroyed the DMV. And the person before that is now the DAS commissioner, had a lifelong career in politics. We need a business person to take over the DMV.
Ms. Gibran.
Thank you. I just want to try and bring us back for a moment to what we were facing in the budget process. Governor Malloy wanted to pass on $400 million of teacher pension onto towns, and then he turned around and zeroed out 33 communities, including my opponent's town, zeroed them out completely of education dollars. Where's the fairness in that? Which is why we sat down to develop a formula that would not take into account anybody's station, whether they were a chair of a committee or not. It wouldn't matter what the population was. The formula was very specific. It took into account poverty, English as a second language, and it created a formula that was fair for everybody. And so to claim that somehow we were giving Greenwich more money than anybody else is a complete mistruth. Completely mistruth. That formula is fair, and it's fair for everyone.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm glad you feel that way, but Greenwich did get more money than the prior year, and every town in the district got less. I'm not sure how that math works, but I guess it does.
And
sure.
Thank you. For a moment, we are. So when we talk about that funding, why is that? Because the formula before this formula was passed was gerrymandered. So they took money from more affluent communities. We've heard affluence in this community, but yet we know Alice has 30% of the people in our community here who are not wealthy. So this idea somehow that we had a fair and balanced system before this ECS formula was started is not true. They were cherry-picking communities and redistributing wealth. And that's exactly what the governor did when he zeroed out your town and 32 others.
Sounds like politics both ways, no matter what. Mr. Adler, go ahead.
Sure. 2 things I just want to address. The first is that union members get targeted very easily in this state. The Republicans and the Yankee Institute have done a great job at making us seem like the enemy. Here's the thing. I'm a working man. I'm barely putting together my budget. There are no savings in my household. And yet, what we have is a situation where we're blamed for the malfeasance of the state employees that are called politicians. All right, so there are only members of the Democratic Party up here and Green Party who are not legislators currently. I do want to remind the audience that there was an arbitrary decision to balance the budget a couple of years ago on the backs of teachers. That is unacceptable. That is a life-altering change that should have been done as part of a grand bargain to make it a more affordable plan for the state, the retirement. I have no issue with some of the plans that were put forward if they were part of an agreement. But unlike the state employees union who have a budget, a contract, the teachers do not. So the legislature can play with our retirement all they want. I hear a lot of comments up here about the moral necessity to keep this retirement whole, but what about the people who are working right now?
Anything else on this before we proceed? Okay, so we're going to go to I'm sorry? Yeah, we're going to go to closing statements. You each have a minute. As you were told, we're going to go through the same order as we did the openings. So we're going to start, Mr. Carney.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who came. You know, my family moved to Westbrook in the 1950s because of the kind community, thoughtful people, and wonderful, safe environment. Because they moved here, my mom moved me and my sister to Old Saybrook when I was 3 for the excellent education and opportunity. She was a single mom who at times had to work 3 jobs to help raise me and my sister. The values she taught me, I take with me to the legislature to make sure that all families have the opportunity to grow the way I did. Actually, I want to make it so they have more opportunities than I had, because this community helped raise me, and I owe it to everyone to work to make our state the best it can be. Connecticut is at a crossroads. We can continue to go down the same path, or we can reverse course and encourage job growth and development to make our state more affordable. My experience, my belief, my knowledge will help guide policy, and we are so very close to getting our state on a more sustainable path. In this time of deep political divide, we need leaders who will stand above that and put our communities first. I have proven that I can do that, and I have proven that I will do that. I am asking for your support on November 6th so I can continue to put people first by advocating for you, your families, and our collective future.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and speak with you all tonight. I have over a decade of executive leadership experience in the nonprofit sector. Our bottom line in the nonprofit sector is our community. I have to lead an organization through accountability, fiduciary responsibility, transparency. We squeeze everything we can out of every penny to maximize service delivery. That's what the government's job is. I have my master's in public administration. I believe good governance is what we need, and we need leaders in Hartford. We need leaders that are going to be different, that are going to reach across the party lines to communicate, to collaborate, to build consensus. I'm not going up to Hartford as a Democrat to toe the party line. I want to go up there and work for our community. I want to work for progress for our state. And I'm asking for your support on November 6th. I hope that you can consider supporting me.
I'll tell you what, how about a deal? If you feel like you have to clap at this point, just put your hands up in the air and wave them. You know, we'll get the idea, and then you can continue. Okay, go ahead. Next one is, let's see, Ms. Gibran.
Thank you. Well, first, I just want to say thank you so much for coming tonight and being very interested in what really is the crossroads of our state. I have a long record of bipartisan work, whether it's on the Environment Committee or on the Budget Committee when we're talking about issues that affect all of us, and I'm proud of that work. But I also lead by example. I'm one of the only legislators who does not send taxpayer-funded mail called franking mail, and I have found ways to cut the budget in ways that does not necessarily affect the immediate services. We tried to do 5-year plans. We've tried to put forward other things in the past, but you have to work together at the end of the day for those budget processes. And if you recall, as I mentioned earlier, we ended up having to kick the governor out of the room so we could have that conversation. We need to have parity in the legislature. Having a tie or taking a majority in the Senate is critically important so that we can continue to talk about these fiscally conservative policies like a bond cap, a spending cap, and other things. And I hope I earn your support on November 6th.
Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight, and thank you, Andy, for moderating. No, we haven't been that cooperative. You've heard where I stand on the issues. There's no need for me to repeat those positions, but I can summarize what you will get if you elect me as your next state senator. I will go to Hartford as a job creator. I will go as a tax cutter, not as a tax raiser. I'll go to Hartford as someone who has streamlined town government to make it more efficient and more responsive. I'll go to Hartford as a manager who created years of balanced budgets and actually been responsible for making those budgets work in the real world. 5 of them voted in unanimously at town meetings. And last but not least, I'll go to Hartford as a problem solver who has worked every day with Democrats, Republicans, and independents. It is time for a change in Hartford. Your town and mine need an experienced, successful advocate as our voice in the state Senate. That's what makes sense, and that's why I'm asking for your vote.
Okay, so now we have Ms. Leveley, and then Mr. McLaughlin, and then Mr. Adler.
It has been very fascinating being here tonight as a forensic psychologist. I think we as a community, however, can feel very optimistic, even in these times of crises, at the good people that are willing to serve and stand up. I will not step down if I am your representative. I have the courage, the confidence, the integrity, and most of all, the wisdom to know the kinds of things that need to be done. We need creative voices. We do not need professional politicians. We need people who are going to look at other ways of creating revenue. We need to look at big box stores like Walmart who foist their failure to pay salaries onto us. We need lots of creativity and lots of energy, and I bring that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been such a tremendous honor to represent the towns that I grew up in for the past 4 years. I feel so incredibly lucky and fortunate to have been born in Connecticut at this time. There are serious challenges that we're faced with, but we live in a state worth fighting for. And I've been honored to do that. Sometimes it's meant standing up and fighting when the governor has come after our town aide. Sometimes it's meant building a bridge with colleagues across the aisle to pass bipartisan budgets and get things done. Either way, despite the challenges that we face, I believe that if we listen to one another and get past the partisan politics, that we can find a way forward, that we can build a more affordable Connecticut for people to raise their families in and to find meaningful work in. And it would be an honor to represent you for another 2 years in Hartford. Thank you so much.
So I'm a lifelong resident of Connecticut. I grew up in Middletown. My dad's a stockbroker. My mom's a social worker. Pretty much a melding of the two with the salary of the latter. I love this state. I'm really tired of people talking it down. I do believe that that does have an impact on our ability to function and attract new businesses in here. I've heard a lot of optimism up at this table today. I think that's a really good thing. We need to find both short-term and long-term problems by reaching across aisles, whether it's unaffiliated, whether it's Green Party, whether it's Republican, or whether it's Democrat, to work together to think about what will make the state not only great, but the best. We have a lot of resources here. We have phenomenal colleges, great research centers. We're right in the midst of two of the major metropolitan cities of the world. How can this not be a place that people want to live? Taxes are an issue. We've talked about Alice and the real estate taxes locally. We need to be able to think creatively, work with everyone, and come up with solutions that allow us to live here, to allow senior citizens who might be on fixed incomes to retire here, and allow new families to establish themselves here and become workers. I ask for your vote on November 6th. Thank you so much for coming tonight.
Let me close with two comments, one to everybody out there and one to the candidates. In 5 weeks on November 6th, we have an election coming up that I think it's not an exaggeration to say is one of the most important elections in a long time. The decisions that are made over these next 2 years are going to have an impact for years and years to come. And so I think it's great that we take the time to find out as much as we can about the candidates and use that to vote and send folks to Hartford who are going to be thinking seriously about all of these issues and how we cannot keep kicking the can down the road and start to make some decisions that are going to be impactful for a long-term future. To the candidates, thank you all for your great comments tonight, some very insightful comments, and I hope that no matter what happens in November, both to those that win and those that don't win, we invite you to stay actively involved with us in the communities. They're doing a lot of hard work. Please reach out to us. Again, whether you're doing hard work in the legislature. There's also some work you can do here. And if you're not in the legislature, there's plenty of stuff we can have you do here. So please reach out. And now let's please, the second time you get to clap officially, let's give everybody a warm applause. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you again to the Council of Beaches, to Valley Shore Community Television. This will be shown, as I said, pretty much nonstop between now and November 6th, so please share it with your friends.